Hi, I'm Matt from the Loom of Time.
I'm Shieldsy from Evocatus.
And this is the Tomb of Lime podcast, where we explore heavy metal music and culture. We are up to track 4 of our track-by-track exploration of the album Nihilreich by the Loom of Time, where we'll be looking at the greed of lesser men and the art of the riff salad. Well, I got a question for you, Shieldsy.
All right.
Let's do some role play. You ready? Okay. I imagine I'm from outer space or the far distant past or something, and I come to you as preeminent expert on heavy metal of the modern age, and I ask you, what makes a good riff?
Ooh.
I knew this would be a tough one. I knew this would be a stumper of a question. But surely there's a metric. Surely there's some...
there's a formula of sorts.
Surely there's
maybe a number of formulas, but...
something that you recognize when you hear one that's good and go, yeah, that's a good riff.
I'm a fan of groove. Like, if there's a groove in a riff.
Okay, so that sort of almost swing...
Yeah, like if a riff that... repeats, regardless of how long it repeats for, if it's got like a driving groove, that's going to get me.
Yeah, I suppose, you couldn't just play a random series of notes over and over again. There has to be some rhythmic
perhaps, I think
or something.
Whether or not, you separate riffs and rhythm, but...
Well, that's one thing I did think about, because there are genres that thrive on just playing a single note, and all the riff is a rhythm in a way.
Sure.
It's not like the different notes are necessary for a good riff necessarily. So maybe okay. Rhythm is the key.
Well, perhaps they're not important for a good rhythm. Because you can have rhythm from drums. It's not necessarily notes there.
Yeah, and it's not a riff at that point, is it?
No, but it's still drums. A rhythm. But you asked me about riff.
Yeah.
Where I think the rhythm is important to me in a good riff. That's a tough question.
Yeah,
particularly because I'm not a guitarist. I know what I know what I like to listen to. Sometimes I have trouble describing it.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Is there anyone out there that you think is a particularly good purveyor of the riff? Someone who comes to mind? I'd ask you for one song, but it'd be too hard to narrow down.
Joe Haley.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Oh, man. Mm-hmm. Riff master.
And his are all really technical and intricate as well. It's like, I'd say it's almost like they're less groovy in a way because they're so well thought out and meticulous. But
I mean, you don't have to listen to Psychroptic for very long to find a groove, right?
Yeah, okay, I suppose so.
Yeah.
At the BPM they play at, you can get a groove going very, very quickly. Mm. Yeah, okay.
How about you? Yeah. Purveyor of the riff.
It's probably one of those things that changes over time, but...
over time...
in weekly? Your tastes, I mean. And throughout the ages as well.
Sure.
The best riff of the 70s might be totally different from the best riff of the 90s or the...
I would expect so.
Yeah.
Unless, that's a really strong riff from the 70s and still, that's the 90s, but still the best riff.
Some guys that I've been interested in the riffs of recently, although, there's this guy named John Brown of the band Monuments, right?
Okay.
Yeah, not a band I've really listened to, but I come across his playing because he kind of markets himself as a rhythm player, whereas all of the other personalities on YouTube kind of are lead players for the most part.
Sure, yeah.
And so when you check it out, I'm like, oh yeah. When the singing's there and the rest of that music is there, I'm like, well, it's not for me exactly, but I recognize the good riff. And also there's a band, Zyklon, which is remnants of at least one iteration of Emperor there for a while. I don't know if they're active anymore. But one thing that I think these guys both do in their riffs is they put these weird sort of extended chords in the middle of them. And I think the only reason I think that's cool now is because it's a spicier version of the riff of yesteryear,
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but in a general sense, there's there's something about that bluesy, almost swingy groove that you can stick into a riff that just hits the spot.
Oh
Isn't it?
yeah.
But man, coming up with one or coming up with a formula for it is really, really tricky. It's almost like sometimes if you found the perfect formula, it would never work because part of the formula is being spicy in some way, innovative in some way that
Sure.
flies in the face of the listener's expectations, and
Yep.
that's one of the things that makes it cool. So, yeah, man. I know I asked you a question, and now you've thrown it back at me, and I couldn't answer it.
That's good.
So the reason I mentioned this is because I think "Greed of Lesser Men" is a very riff-oriented song.
Mm-hmm.
To the point that one of the sort of derogatory terms that they use in the guitar world is a riff salad.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
Yeah. And I guess it just denotes, there's no real structure. It's just a bunch of stuff thrown into a
Salad.
bowl. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so yeah, again, they use that as a negative thing. But in a way, with the Loom of Time's music, just because it's disinterest in repetition in a lot of ways, it kind of just comes with the territory. And I just kind of go, all right, if you're calling it a riff salad, that's fine.
Sure.
It's a riff salad. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But that having said that, I think there's a lot of strong riffs on there. It's just it might be the case that they only connect in some way to the riff that immediately precedes it and the riff immediately after it, and then any more distant than that, and who knows where it could have been going or gone. But it also contains one of my favorite riffs on the album.
Okay.
Which comes near the feels like it's near the end in my mind structurally, but I think in the actual song it's like halfway through.
Okay.
There's this.
Yeah.
I think we hammer that home for a long time there.
Yeah.
With its variations, of course, in the style that we do it. But yeah, I think sometimes when you just find that groove while you're writing, it's like. Man, just got a groove on it. And I think, that's one thing that our music probably lacks in a lot of ways because we don't spend long enough playing one thing to get that groove going.
Now that you mention it, that section does go for quite a long time. And yeah, it does have a driving groove to it. Yeah.
So yeah, probably one of the few places where I guess in my quest to be different all the time, at one point I had to go, all right, well, I got to be same for a long time to make it different from the other songs. If you
got to make it the same to be different.
Yeah. It's one of the interesting parts about writing music in that way is that I feel like melodies almost, because it's something you can make with your mouth when you're singing, right? It's something you can construct in your head in quite a simple fashion, but because our vocal cords, I mean, apart from maybe some few exceptions, can't do more than one note at a time for the most part. It's not like we can really conceptualize in our brains the riff and the way it might come about. And so what happens is to write these things, you kind of have to be sitting at your guitar and doing something. Yeah. And the thing is, you can have an animal run across the keyboard of a piano and it'll come up with some kind of music, right? But it's not a thought out musical thing from the creative mind of a musician. Okay. And I think a riff is kind of like that as well, where it's more a mechanical thing that you're just getting the muscle memory bits of things that you've learnt with your hands and your instrument. And, even if you were deaf, you could play something on there and it'd come out of something,
Yeah. Something would happen.
Yeah. So it's a different creative thing, and maybe you can't. I think that maybe it's actually harder to come up with a riff just in your head than it would be to do it physically on an instrument. And so there's almost two different kinds of writing that go into a thing like heavy metal, which is very riff oriented, and that's the trade-off between the riff and musical thinking. So yeah, I don't know if it's something you've noticed in the music that you listen to where bands are more riff-oriented or more musically oriented, and how that sort of makes you feel about the music, or how different it
I guess it's not something that I typically think about without knowing in advance how they came up with a certain song, how they came up with a riff, how they came up with a song, whether or not they stumbled upon a riff. Like bands they come up with music in all different ways. Sometimes it might be just one guy in the band writes the song from start to finish and all the arrangements and everything, and goes, right, that's how the song goes. Learn to play that. Where other stuff is more like a jam, where someone will come up with like just noodling around with their guitar, come up with a riff and play it again, and someone else will pick it up and go, that's pretty cool, man, I'll play some lead over the top of that. And then the drummer's sitting in the back there going, yep, feels his way into the tempo and starts bashing something, and in about a minute or so.
Do you think you can tell, listening to music, how they came about like that? Or perhaps is there an inkling there, do you think?
I think it's possible to do. I don't know how good I would be at it.
Okay.
Because, I mean, this stuff, it would come up in all different ways. Like someone might come up with that riff that I was talking about kind of spontaneously, and the rest of the band kind of picks it up sitting in the studio or wherever they are. But that riff might end up being at the end of a song or in the middle of a song. It's not like they're coming up with it to start with, and then, okay, and then what's the next bit of the song, and then what's the next bit of the song? It could be anywhere. Like you described how a lot of your record came together with the first part of the first song first, and then so on and so forth. There's no reason why you couldn't, just happen upon something that you created for yourself and then go, right, this is going to be the basis or, the backbone of this song, but we're going to throw all this, sugar and spice in front of it, behind it, on top of it, wherever. Mm-hmm. Maybe even that creative process by building on that first thing you came up with, and by the end of it, you're not even using that first thing that you came up with. You can save that one for a rainy day.
Yeah, yep. And that's actually a creative technique I like to sort of think about when you're making probably more complex arrangements, is that you can make a thing and then you can layer stuff on top of it, like leads and vocal harmonies or whatever you want to do, and then you can start taking pieces away from that bottom thing. Yeah. So it kind of makes it perhaps sound more complex than it is, because you've taken away the fundamental thing that maybe it's easier to listen to and latch onto and understand. And for a long time, songwriting, listening to all these different bands, it would just boggle my mind, like, how did these guys come up with this stuff? But I think to go back to George R.R. Martin, the way he describes his writing was that he's not like a writer. I can't remember exactly what he said, but he said something more like he's just gardening. So he just goes in and he plants seeds and just sees how they come about, and he just keeps going in.
I think there are two types of writers, the architects and the gardeners. The architects plan everything ahead of time, like an architect building a house. But the gardeners dig a hole, drop in a seed and water it. As the plant comes up and they water it, they don't know how many branches it's going to have. They find out as it grows. And I'm much more a gardener than an architect. George R.R. Martin.
And it evolves over time, I guess, is what I'm saying. So I imagine a lot of music is like that. There's probably some bands you can think of that are just very riff oriented, and basically all their music is just the riff after the riff. I think, thrash is a good place to go for that kind of thing. Yeah. And then there's probably bands where it's all kind of chords and melodies. Maybe more of that symphonic-y, some power metal-y end of things does that maybe a little bit well. But I guess a lot of bands have a mixture of it. And being a good musician is about finding the balance and having all these tools in your arsenal about being creative that allows you to do any and all of them in one song if you need to. Yeah. And again, we find that there are no rules. Gotta try and find a rule for how to write a good riff, but man, it's impossible. And I don't think I could write a good riff without sitting at my guitar and noodling on it. Yeah, okay. I don't think I could just come up with one in my head. But I do wonder if there are people out there that do that. When you hear about Beethoven or whoever who could, might have been deaf and still written a symphony or something, I suppose it has to be possible in some way.
How deaf was he?
I don't suppose we can ask him. I don't suppose we can check.
That boggles the mind. How you can come up with that and then make it so people can play it, and then for you to be able to sort of see the people playing it. I guess you can't hear it really, but you feel it. I don't know, I've never been deaf before.
Yeah, well, and I know obviously he didn't start off deaf, he learned all his music before that, but
right, well, there you go.
Yeah, but I suppose if you learn enough of the rules of music and you're in it, like with the notation and the understanding with it
Oh,
long
yeah.
enough, I suppose you can learn how to at least stay within the rules so that something doesn't sound stupid. Or,
And write it down
yes. Yeah.
and then go, here, what do you think of this? And
Yeah.
people play it and go, it's pretty good for a deaf guy.
It'd be. I can't imagine the how he took criticism for things that he wrote while he was deaf. Like
Table flipping, I imagine. Out. Next.
yeah, until I get a good response.
Yeah, that's often a fun way to look for feedback is to dismiss everything until you get the result you wanted. Yes. I am right.
Have you ever been surprised by feedback you've gotten on music you've been involved in, or have you found that the feedback has led you to believe you're pretty self-aware in that regard?
I've had a fair bit of surprisingly positive feedback.
Like you didn't know how well it would be received by people,
Yeah,
and then they've been like, "Yeah, it's good."
yeah, but able to explain like how and why it's good,
Yeah, okay.
and then thinking
So,
about
yeah,
it
it's
to
just
myself,
not,
going, "Oh man,
Being nice to you. If
this
they've
guy
got a good
definitely does not know
explanation.
us. He thinks we're way more talented than we are." But you know, it's been I guess it's early days for us to be having reviews and stuff, and having people tell the world and tell us what they think of our music. So it's pretty interesting times for us at the moment reading about that. And I'm sure you went through that before as well with Niall Reich. So
Yeah, again, it's you got to be careful about your own expectations of what's going to happen.
Oh, yeah.
And keep them moderate so that
it's almost like you want. I don't know if you remember a Facebook page. I Probably Hate Your Band. I think that's what it was called.
Yeah.
And they always did reviews, and they had a huge backlog of reviews. Like bands would request, like, "Hey man, review my album." You know, it's basically just like roast me on Reddit.
Okay,
you know?
yes, okay.
So, and this guy would post scathing reviews of these albums, you know, and people loved it. I don't know what it's doing at the moment, if anything, but I always thought that would be fun.
Yeah.
To have your album reviewed so brutally, whether or not how much honesty, or it's just like embellishment of, you know, how can I insult this band? How can I wear away at their very soul?
You'd have to have at least a modicum of self-confidence to be able to put yourself up for something like that.
Oh,
I suppose.
sure, yeah. There might be just the straw that breaks the camel's back. You know what? I'm not doing this anymore. This guy is right. But anyway, I don't know that people do that anymore,
No, okay.
or market themselves as such. Anyway, they probably, yeah, man, I'll review your album. 2 out of 10.
I think nobody would go to them to ask for a review if they kept giving bad reviews to everyone or something. But I don't know. To me, that's not how critics sort of operate.
You'd hope not.
And like why they're not popular because bands go to them for good reviews and everyone comes away happy or something.
I don't really know the history of that. I Probably Hate Your Band, like how they came about to, you know, the infamy that comes with those bad reviews. Like, I think they're good reviews of, you know, probably good music, but they just pick it to pieces. So I don't know whether or not they started out like that, but I guess people latched onto it. It's like, hey, I want a bad review.
Yeah. Okay.
Write something funny about us.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I mean, if you can be scathing and you've got a good sense of humor, you'll get someone who sees the humor in it.
That's
suppose.
right.
Yeah.
But yeah, we had some good responses, and it's been surprising to hear, I guess, feedback.
How do you think your band sits on the scale of riff to more musically inclined writing?
How do I think they sit?
Yeah.
Because I don't necessarily know the correct
You don't know
answer
how
if
they're
there is
written,
one.
no, but I guess you know the songs pretty well, being a part of them, so you could at least have an insight into.
I'd like to think that they come up with some riff and build on it, and then try and work that into some kind of structure. Whether or not there's a formula, I know Vaughan and Phil write differently to each other, or they use different formulas. I've noticed on a bunch of Phil's songs, I suppose, that he would come up with a kind of epic intro,
Yeah.
and then it would break into the song whether or not it shared anything with the intro, and then that song might go through and it's quite intricate in its structure, and then it might repeat its whole self again.
Okay, yep.
You know, I've noticed that on a couple of Phil's songs.
Yeah, okay. I understand.
Where you think you could probably just run that song the once, or the half of the song.
If you did half, there wouldn't be any repetition in it.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
But it's kind of there's a couple of songs I can think of where that's happened. He's got an intro and it's really cool, and then the song sort of kicks in, and then you notice if you're paying attention that the same main part of the song happens again in its entirety.
So yes, I mean at some point live you've played just half of a song to save on time for your set, right? So
easy to do in that case. Where necessary. I don't like doing that kind of thing, but we found that it was comfortable to.
When you're not doing one of those 3-hour an evening with Evocatus shows.
Yeah.
Read a Lesson Man, that's also one where I started with an epic intro. I think maybe that was my idea at the start of that song.
Yes.
To do something epic, because everything was a bit down to earth before that or something.
So it is an epic intro. I'll give you that. Like definitely massive intro. How did that evolve from when it was kind of first conceived as an idea for an intro to how it's turned out? Like how many guitars are in that intro?
So it's probably 2 rhythms doing probably the same thing, and then a lead and a lead harmony.
Yep.
And that's all you sort of need for that epic thing. And I think that's the rhythm guitars are probably not doing much at all, just one note and holding it for a long time and then hitting it at the right accented note. And I think that's one of the places where you just got to go, all right, I'll just leave space for something to build on top of it. Like if you try and make something too intricate just in the rhythm, then it might be too busy for the lead to be effective.
Sure. Yeah.
So I guess when you're a guitarist and you're thinking of playing these things, you do think about, I'm playing it and what am I going to play and how's it going to sound? And so sometimes, and a lot of bands do when they're focused on their live arrangement, I suppose, is they make the rhythm parts more intricate. They might switch from rhythm to lead quite a lot because they're trying to be the guy that does everything for that part of the song.
Yep.
But sometimes I guess, I'm thinking I must have, by the time I've written this one, thought that I would be able to do 2 guitars on stage or at least, or maybe have the bass, you can do tricky stuff like have an octave on the bass, octave effect to make it more full so it can fill the rhythm part out while the rhythm's not doing rhythm.
Yep.
And so, maybe that's what I was doing. But it was about leaving space in the rhythm part for the lead parts and the harmony. And so I think that's where its epicness comes from. And just having the drums hit very sparse but very accented chords.
Did you leave that up to Steve as well, or was that all? Did you have some hand in that?
I probably would have had some hand in it because it's pretty simple. It's probably he's probably hitting and then doing a fill and then a hit, and then a big space and then a fill and then a hit. I'm not writing those fills, obviously. I couldn't do that. But I guess when he hears it and it's just a dun and there's just a big cymbal crash and it lasts for a long time, he knows the feel of it already. So he's going to do something similar to that. Yeah. And then it goes into blast beats. And again, this is just all right, let's do a black metal song again. Can't do it, man.
Because it's super like huge, epic, like classic metal intro.
Yeah.
Straight to black metal.
Yes. Yeah.
Like black metal in every way.
Oh yeah. Very black metal.
There's no one in the band at that point not playing black metal.
Yes. And then there's a lot of I guess slower, sort of groovier riffs in there that aren't very black metal after that point. Yes. So I think maybe I had going for an epic feel, and a doomy riff kind of comes with an epic feel, almost always, right? And of course, Steve lends his hardcore breakdowny feel over all those doom riffs.
Oh yeah.
But it's pretty much that's why it's hard for me to just keep track of everything. But it is a riff salad. It just goes from riffs like that to another riff like that to another riff like that, and then it just stops, and there's that dun, 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 before that big long section of the final groovy riff.
That big long section of riff, yeah.
And that dun, 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 I think maybe I was pretty preoccupied throughout the writing of all the previous songs on the album to make sure there was no gaps, because when you start and stop a song, especially when the music's written so that there's no repeating parts and so on, it kind of sounds like maybe you just stopped. You couldn't work out how to join these two bits together, so you just stop and then you start again.
Start the next song.
8 legs, for example. So I did consciously want to try and stay away from that if I could. But, in the name of variety again, at some point you go, all right, let's make it really deliberate though. So, you really know that we're stopped for a reason.
But it never really, I think listening to it, it never stopped in such a way that I thought like, oh, what's going on? What's he doing? Because there's never I don't know that there's a moment of silence at all in there. There's always something that's happened.
Yeah, there's always something. Yeah.
You've got...
or the silence is so brief.
That's right. It's so brief. Like your vocals have just tailed off like...
yeah.
And then it's almost like... Straight away. Yes.
Yeah. I think it's important to try at least to have something from the previous riff or section or something that... trails over into the next section. Now, it might just be that a vocal rings out, but it might be something more deliberate than that, like a lead part runs down into the next riff or whatever.
Yep.
And I think that's one way of making the music flow is making sure that there's connecting features, no matter how minor. So I think in this song even, there's a part where it kind of rings out on one chord, and then the drums and bass come in, just with a double picking. And just the bass, and then the next riff is that rhythm as well.
Yeah.
And so it kind of telegraphs what you're going to do, but in a subtle way, and it just helps to glue it all and join it all together.
Yeah.
But that very open tom hitting drum section, even in the studio, the way we recorded it, it was different, and I actually had the engineer go in and cut a piece out. So how it is like this dun 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 dun, and then the rhythm guitars come in. Dun, 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 dun,
Yep.
But not, and then once it's played through that riff once, it comes in with the whole band, right? Originally, I had the lead guitar playing essentially that rhythm riff first, and then the rhythm guitar coming in, and then everyone coming in.
Okay.
And I think that was just me going, well, I can make the song as long as I want. I can do whatever I want. But when I listened to it in post, I guess, after everything was done, I'm just like, it's too indulgent. It's too much. It's too much.
Oh,
so I just got him to snip that section, and it works because it's just lead and the drums, so nothing got lost. It just goes from drums only into rhythm, rather than drums then lead then rhythm.
All this master tracking still exists, right? Like this indulgent version of this song can be a B-side one day.
Oh, such a minor difference, but yeah, well, it may not still exist. This is a number of years ago, and
sure.
Who knows whether, like, I don't have it.
Okay, well that's,
So it may well be gone.
Now that I think of that, like a lot of the stuff that, was engineered by Brian, I wouldn't have a clue if all of the outtakes and stuff still exist. Like the whole, project files with all of the audio.
Yep.
Because, there was loads of takes of lots of stuff.
Okay. And some that were not really... better than the ones that went on there, just different or something, and you you captured the best ones? Or?
Not necessarily different. They would have just been trying to do the same thing, but better and better until we got it right, and then whatever layered repetition.
Like I do wonder about some of the music I wrote long before I did any of this stuff, and whether I've still got it. But in a way, I'm almost glad that I don't have access to it. Because it's, it might be a crutch creatively to just go and, harvest
rehash
old
old
riffs,
stuff.
Yeah. And I part of the ethos of why I wrote the way I did is because I do believe in the, human's ability to be creative and consistently come up with new things. It's kind of part of what we do.
Yeah.
And so, I don't see that there's a reason to go and rehash old stuff. So even if I had access to that stuff, I I would hope that I wouldn't go back and do it. Almost that I would always keep pushing forward with new stuff. Because I mean, do you really believe that your brain's eventually going to run out of things to make? I mean,
not really, but there's got to be some creative element to taking those things that do exist,
no doubt,
and like tipping them on their head, so to speak.
Mm.
You know, there's creativity in that for sure. Even though
I guess when you do like a cover song and you want to change the arrangement slightly to something, you know, it's
not even slightly, like
yeah, but I mean, there's a creative element to doing a cover song, even though someone else has already written the music and it's done.
For sure.
And I guess, yeah, you could do covers of your old unreleased material.
I even like, and I'd like for us to do it, but we haven't really got round to experimenting with that kind of thing, but play some songs live that on stage are different to what is recorded. Mm-hmm. You know, whether or not they have like a really long, like self-indulgent interlude in the middle of the song, for example. Like I love it when bands do that.
Yeah.
Or chuck in something in the middle of a song that's not even part of that song. You know,
it's like as long as it's good, then the people who've never heard it before will still enjoy it as much as they'd enjoy any of your music, and the people that have heard it before get something exciting and new to listen to and go, oh, that's special. I haven't heard it done this way before. One of the reasons that the way a lot of, I suppose, metal in particular gets written is not a groovy improvised jam, but something that someone's put together quite meticulously.
Sure.
Is that there's a reason everything is the way it is and where it is. And having something else in there would mean deliberately going in and specifically putting that stuff in there. And it takes quite a bit of forethought. And it's like, well, if you're going to do that, you may as well have just written the song differently or something. But yeah, I guess different for being different, not necessarily improving the song or something.
I think
for the sake of the live show.
You have a rule like that, it can be fun to challenge it for anyone's benefit. It doesn't matter why you're doing it, whether or not you're doing it for yourself or you know that your particular audience is going to enjoy it.
Don't worry, forget the audience. We're not doing this for them. You know. Speaking of which, you know, the very end of this song, Greater Lesser Men, is very indulgent as well. There's about 20 seconds of just feedback at the end there. And I'm just screaming over it as long as I can hold out. That was just another one of those things where I was just like, yeah, I can do this. There's no one to stop me from having 20 seconds of feedback at the end of the song.
Yeah.
Like everyone likes to have a big outro where there's some feedback in the guitars, but I just wanted to take the joke too far, you know?
Oh, yeah.
So sometimes you just got to take things too far. And I have heard people speak about that way, you know, a lot of, like, you know, I've been listening to guys talk about audio production, and a lot of them are saying sort of a balanced mix is boring, you know. Sometimes you got to take things too far to get to that more interesting thing. And so I guess that was what I was doing, although it was a silly and simple way to do it. I remember because we were tracking guitars in the sort of engineering room and not in the booth where the amps were, that to get that feedback, I'd have to go and walk in there. And, to know when the song was going to end, because I didn't really count out those bars. I just sort of winged it. The second guitar, where I had to match it and finish at the same time, I just had to look through the window at Mitter, and he was like, 3, 2, 1, all right, finish. And so that's how we got that perfectly synced.
Okay. Yeah, right. We actually, I can't remember specifically the song it was. It was on the new record. Anyway, when we were demoing it, we had a bunch of tracks on the screen, you know, on Cubase, and we had the whole session, like all the drums and all the guitars and everything were in this session when we were tracking vocals. Demo vocals, mind you. So this was demoing the song at home, long before we took it to the studio. And I remember some of the vocal tracks we laid down and we weren't paying attention to which track we were putting it on. Okay. So we ended up recording a bunch of vocals on one of the guitar tracks by accident.
Okay.
That had a whole bunch of like guitar plugins
okay.
and presets and stuff all on it. And we're playing it back. And it was like, oh, what has happened there? Like something has gone massively wrong. And we realized, and we played it back a couple of times out of interest's sake and thought, you know what? That's actually pretty cool. I mean, we didn't do It's not like you can't use that for the whole song.
No.
I mean you can, but
yes.
we didn't.
No.
But it was one where we took that idea that we stumbled upon in the demo tracking, and took it to the studio and said like, we want this, make it like this.
Okay.
And yeah, so that's what we ended up in the final product as well.
Yeah, no, that's cool.
It was a happy accident.
Yeah.
And then I guess some people might think like they've seen that before and you do that on purpose, but ours was only on purpose after we kind of fell flat on our face into it, and then thought that's cool. We'll do that in the real version.
Yeah.
As well.
And I suppose that takes some of that sort of ability to let go, because obviously you had an idea in your mind of how you want it to go, and this was different. So I imagine your immediate reaction is, well, that's wrong.
But immediately it was wrong.
Yes.
But then after that, it's like, actually
yeah, it's right.
It sounds pretty good.
Yeah.
And it was one where we had it was right at the end of a song and the vocals was sort of tailing off. Again, I can't remember what song or what the line is, but I'd done a bunch of line where it was kind of like deep vocals. Mm-hmm. And then by the end of it, it was kind of a high-pitched scream. Mm-hmm. And as that high-pitched scream kept recurring, we added more distortion, more and more distortion from the last one. And at the end of it, it's nonsense. You can't make out what it is at all.
Yeah.
And when we stumbled upon that technique for how to finish it off, we pushed it to the nth degree.
Yep.
And that's something I strive for. After I thought, like, okay, now by the end of the song, and it repeats quite a lot, make it nonsense, like so distorted that it doesn't. It's not even, it doesn't make sense anymore.
Yeah, it is a slightly indulgent thing where you just go, let's make it push it as far as we can push it to crazy extremes. Yeah. No, totally understand.
It was only on the vocals though, and then at the end of the song, like he kind of wrapped it all up, so the whole mix kind of went to nonsense as well, but only at the very end.
Yeah.
So the music was still, like the guitars and everything was still happening normal.
Yeah, what is it? I feel like it's Opeth track. Is it Leper Affinity, the track 1 from Blackwater Park? Wait, that's not. Is it Leper Affinity? I don't know. Anyway, at the very end of that, they put a bit crusher distortion that gets worse and worse and worse, and until it's just like. So it's like the end of a song is like a really good place to just push it.
Yeah.
Because it's like you don't need to come back from there, because it's like once you've pushed it off the edge, if you come back, maybe everything would sound too tame and normal. That's probably heaps of stuff, especially when you're getting in with the drummer and they're doing their parts. Mm-hmm. If I didn't write them, then everything Steve wrote was wrong as far as I was concerned. But most of it still stayed on there because that's fine. It's good. Wrong is good sometimes because it's different than what you expected, even when you were writing it. Yeah,
I mean, take it from someone who didn't write it. It's good.
Yeah. Okay. Lyrically, okay. There's a mythological artifact called the Ring of Gyges. I'm not sure that's how you pronounce it. Of course there is. And it's, I think Plato talks about it in one of his books, and he uses it as an example. Basically, the go is some farmer finds it in a cave in like the tomb of some ancient creature or whatever, and he puts the ring on and he can turn invisible. And so he immediately proceeds to go and seduce the king's wife, the queen, and kill the king, and then become king of the kingdom, whatever, And I think in Plato's thought experiment about it, he was basically saying that when a human being is given the opportunity to do stuff without consequence, essentially, how is it that they're going to act when they've got that power? Mm-hmm. And he basically said that, they're probably going to be selfish and do self-centered things. Mm-hmm. And that anyone who hears about it or knows that they have the ring would say that if they didn't, they were kind of an idiot. Or rather, they wouldn't say that out loud, but they'd think you know, man, if they had that power and they weren't doing shifty stuff, they're just wasting the opportunity.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Suppose now that there were two such magic rings, and the just put on one of them and the unjust the other. No man can be imagined to be of such an iron nature that he would stand fast in justice. And this we may truly affirm to be a great proof that a man is just, not willingly or because he thinks that justice is any good to him individually, but of necessity. For wherever anyone thinks that he can safely be unjust, there he is unjust. Plato.
I kind of wanted to dwell on that a little bit, but try and think about it in a more modern perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the Ring of Gyges certainly has its modern implications in the anonymity of the internet. So we've got this technological advancement now that gives a lot of people an invisibility in a sense, and then we can sort of see how humans act when they've got that invisibility. Now it's not too clever to think that that's internet's going to be a bad place for human beings who act like that, and I think it's not exactly a big leap that a lot of people think that the internet does, and anonymity on the internet does provide some problematic or opportunity for problematic personality traits to come out.
Yep.
I think going into this song, it was like I was trying to find the sort of purest kind of litmus test of internet behavior that was going to represent how people act when they know something is wrong to do it, but they know they can get away with it.
Exploitable nonetheless.
Yes. You know, more or less, although it hovers around a few things, I think more or less it comes, the thing I thought about mainly was intellectual property theft, essentially. Because, it's easy, but I think people do think it's wrong. Although I'm sure that there are people who are right on the end of the free speech spectrum saying that all data is just information and it should be free to everyone. I'm sure that's the case, all right? But I think for the most general people, when they're, stealing music or whatever from the internet, they're not like, oh, I'm entitled to this music. They're just like, it's,
It's possible, so I'm doing it.
Yeah, yeah. And I guess, I think one of the Stoic philosophers was saying something like, when you do wrong to someone, you do wrong to yourself. It's not just the other person that suffers, but you kind of become worse, and then it, that can make you worse and worse over time. And the more worse you become, the more worse you are to other people, and it just makes things worse and worse.
No man can do wrong with impunity. For when is a vine faring badly? When it is acting contrary to its own nature. When is a cock faring badly? Under the same conditions. So also man. What then? Is his nature to bite and kick and throw into prison and behead? No, but to do good, to work together, and to pray for the success of others. Therefore he is faring badly, whether you will or no, when he acts unfeelingly. Epictetus.
And so there's probably been throughout history a lot of structures in place to stop people from doing that, and so they never get into that spiral. But in the internet age, it might even be with things like intellectual property theft being so easy to do and be, without consequence, really, that it might be easier for people to get in the cycle of getting worse.
Sure, yeah.
Perhaps they're wrong. Perhaps everyone that engages in this activity, which is probably very widespread, doesn't think that they're doing wrong, and that they've started to justify why they are all right doing it. I got to think, though, that I imagine that I'm not sure which came first. It's almost like they tried some illegal activity that's very easy, and then they found it was so easy, and then they've gone to themselves, no, I'm not a bad person, so what I'm doing must be right in some way. Actually, I'm stealing from really rich record executives. That's it.
Yeah.
But when I think about it, if a big company of any kind takes a financial hit, I don't think it's the guys at the top that suffer because of it. So
yeah.
Justify it how you like. But I think as far as those kind of activities go, I think intellectual property theft is probably the closest thing we've got to where you can see human beings who have no consequences to their actions, but still know that it's something that's wrong to do and how they act. And the answer is they do it a lot. they do it a lot.
Yeah.
So it's not a great look for humankind when you look at it that way. And I just guess I wanted to expose that in the lyrics there. There's another phenomenon I think that I'm highlighting here with human psychology is that when people look at the sort of spectrum of really bad to really righteous and good and so on, they're generally, I think this is how people work, is they'll pick somewhere along that spectrum and they'll draw a line and they'll say below that is bad and above that is okay.
Yeah.
And so I won't go below that line. I'm a good person. But human beings tend to, in my experience, go, all right, here's the line. I'm going to get as close to the line as possible without going over. And I think it's probably easiest to see in things like maybe what language we use. Like if you think about how you use language when you were a kid and while you were under your parents' rule and school and whatever else was telling you what naughty words you weren't allowed to say, and you think about how your language has changed now, you probably had a list of words that you weren't allowed to say and you thought they were wrong. But over time, you've been, as the words have gotten worse, and there's some really bad words down here, you've found that you've been allowing the less bad ones in. Yep. And going, yeah, that's okay. That's not so bad. Yeah. And then at some point you've gone, well, this one's not so bad. And
the line has shifted.
The line has shifted, yeah. The other one I think about is infidelity in romantic relationships or sexual relationships. Is like, at the top it's just like, I won't talk to members of the opposite sex or whatever it is, and then it's I won't flirt with them, but flirting, it's just being nice, really, there's the work wife or whatever they call it, the girl at work, it's like I'm just being friendly and I won't spend too much time alone with them, blah blah blah, and before long, it's just incremental, and every time you get as close to the line as you can, and then you dip below, the attitude that humans, I feel like, should take in a way is that if I've dipped below the line, I should redouble my efforts to stay as far away from the line as possible.
Repent.
Yeah, but that is never the way it goes. No one ever goes, I've done the wrong thing. I really need to stay as far away from that line as possible. Their attitude is like, well, the line was in the wrong place.
Like people that quit drinking after some, particularly, deep dive under that line.
Yeah, okay.
And then, there's people that go cold turkey on that kind of thing. So, but I mean, you're right though.
Yeah.
It would be a rare case.
Yeah.
But there are cases.
Yeah, obviously. And I think it would be a good habit to be into, actually, to go, if I dip below my line to actually, in the first place, maybe try and stay away from the line rather than get as close to it as possible.
Sure.
But yeah, you're right. Of course, there are people who turn it around.
It's fun in the chase, though, right?
Yeah.
And then you hung over and go, man, I'm never drinking again.
Yeah. Yeah. You say I'm never drinking again, and then it's like, well, I'm never drinking vodka again.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh well, I'll never drink that much vodka again. I'll never mix my drinks, And then before long, you're practically back down to where you were again. And then the cycle continues, I guess.
We've been here before.
Yeah. So, I mean, I wanted to observe that in human behavior, highlight it, I suppose.
Yep.
So if you highlight, maybe people will reflect on how they behave on the internet. And if we can expose the idea that this is how people tend to feel and act because they tend to like the idea that they're a good person and that if they've done something wrong, it wasn't wrong. It was just the line was in the wrong place.
Sure.
If we highlight that we have a bias towards this, then we can kind of help try and correct it in our actions and hopefully not end up in a spiral where we just keep getting worse and worse.
Only if that consequence exists, right?
Well, no, I mean, again, going back to the Stoics, one of the things that they said is, a good deed doesn't need reward. It is its own reward. You've made the world a better place, whatever.
Virtue is a harmonious disposition, worthy of being chosen for its own sake and not from hope or fear or any external reward. Cleanthes.
No, I think it's important that the no consequence part of it is part of how we reflect on how we act. Because if you say to yourself, I'm a good person, and there's an asterisk there that says only when people are looking, are you a good person? Well, that's the question that we want to raise. And
right.
I guess we want to say, even when there's no consequences, maybe if you want the world to be a better place and you think that starting with yourself is a good way to make the world a better place. So to try and make yourself a better person, then maybe even when there are no negative consequences to your indulgent actions, that that you'll still choose to do the right thing.
Very noble.
Something like that. Or again, it's a thought experiment. It's something worth thinking about.
Yeah.
And human morality and ethics is a complicated thing, and it shifts and changes, and perceptions of it shift and change, and so on. So, but in any case, I think it's always important to make sure that we're thinking about it, so that we can. Sure, it was maybe Asimov again who said something like, "No problem was solved by being more ignorant of it," or something like that.
If knowledge can create problems, it is not through ignorance that we can solve them. Isaac Asimov.
Okay.
So it's not like, I mean, if we're having an awareness and an understanding of the problem, we'll only be better able to deal with it rather than sweeping it under the rug and being ignorant of it.
Yeah.
So you choose a song, you write some lyrics, you try and highlight a behavior in human beings, and if they're aware of it, even if they disregard what you've said and they're even worse than they were before, at least if we're aware of it, we can better understand it and how people act. And if you understand something in yourself, you can better understand it in other people. And
you certainly won't fix it if you're not aware of it.
Yeah, exactly. So awareness is important, and if you can highlight an issue, I can't see it hurting really in that regard. I guess, well, I say that. There's always exceptions. If you're very aware of someone else's problem in particular and you just want to highlight their problems, that could be detrimental in some ways. But but you know what I'm saying. If we keep it introspective, being aware of your own problems is only going to help you sort them out, so that they don't surprise you later or come back to bite you, whatever it might be. The internet is a good place to think about human psychology because it's an interesting and emerging and changing environment for us, and I think there's whole areas of study into it, and it's just interesting.
I remember way back at the start of these episodes where we first started to talk about lyrics and your songs and how they came about, and you said that the lyrics they're not important.
Correct.
Don't worry about the lyrics.
Yeah, I still maintain that that's the case.
After the last 20 minutes, I find that hard to believe.
But you remember what I also said was that you put all that depth there for those people,
who go looking for it. Sure.
But it could have just as easily been nonsense, and for most people, that would have been just as good a song. But to go that extra mile, you have to put a lot of extra thought into it, I suppose.
A lot of extra thought.
But because lyrics is something that you just come up with when you're inspired. It doesn't cost you anything. It's not like I've set aside Monday nights to sit down and think of lyrics. And so if I wasted that time, no, it's not like that. It doesn't cost me anything to think about writing lyrics with some depth to them or something.
Do you find it easier, like you talked about the difficulties of, without a guitar, for example, to sit there and come up with a riff? So lyrically, do you just find a theme? Like for your new record, for example, you got similar themes going on?
Yeah,
I mean, this record has a theme.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
I imagine the new record might
even
have
says
a theme
there
as well.
at the beginning, there's an exploration of morality and meaning in the face of nihilism. So yeah. There's a theme there. I guess in some ways that's a little statement I came up with after the fact.
Yeah.
But obviously because of the emotions that you want to get in there, it has to sort of come out from a similar place, a similar standpoint. And if you felt inspired in some way that was too far removed from the other things you were writing, you might have to go, well, no, this is not right for this project.
Sure.
Or it's right for a single that I'll release at a later date with a symphonic.
But I mean, all of these are in the same vein, like you say.
And I think that might also because I only felt inspired to write lyrics when I was in a certain kind of mood. So it's kind of almost like, if you're really happy, you don't really feel inspired to go and write angry music. So no lyrics are going to come out of you at that point. So, Or, I mean, when people want to write happy music, that's great. You can write happy
Sure.
music, but obviously that wasn't the intent. And no, I can't say that when I'm happy, I do feel like going and writing lyrics because I'm busy off doing the happy thing that's making me happy. Or
Sure. Yeah.
So yeah, there is I guess there's a few different reasons why things came out the way they did, and it's not like super deliberate. It's almost naturally because I had to feel a certain way for them to come out, and yeah, I guess it's a bit of a feedback loop there.
You jump onto the internet,
yeah,
look for some inspiration.
yes, yeah. I mean, that's not. I'm sure that has happened at some point here and there with these things as well. It's a weird sensation, is that when you're listening to an album. And you're listening to someone say some lyrics, or I mean, a lot of different media, is that you're basically a captive audience. You don't get to talk back at the guy who's saying these lyrics or has written the script of this movie this way or whatever. And it's not a debate in that sense, and it's a kind of soapbox one-way argument, right? And so if you hear someone who's saying things that you don't agree with, there's no recourse for you to deal with that information except just to listen.
Or stop listening.
Yeah, I suppose so, yeah. I mean, if you're sitting in the theatre, I suppose you could walk out if you hear something you disagree with. I'd discourage that kind of behaviour. But yeah, I think, and when it comes time for you to be the creative person writing these lyrics, you kind of got to say, well, this is my soapbox now. What I'm going to say, they're going to have to listen to, and they're not going to be able to do anything about it. It's almost dangerous on the part of the writer to be too self-indulgent again, and because you can almost do it consequence-free because no one's going to be able to stop you and say, hey, that's not right. So in a way, you've got to kind of guard yourself against those kind of problems. Now, you might say the internet is different than that because it's in a forum format where you can reply to certain things that people say on the internet.
If the thing has such a mechanism, but yeah, more often than not.
Yeah. Or even, you could cut and paste whatever the thing where it doesn't have the mechanism and then post it somewhere and then rant on whatever thing. So it can happen. But maybe it's happening more, recently than I have seen it in the past, but very rarely do I see those kinds of discussions on the internet come out to a positive outcome for either party that's involved in an online comment.
Very divisive.
Yeah. So and especially being that I'm more or less an introvert as well, I'm disinclined to engage with things on the internet in that way. But if I do read something I'm frustrated with on the internet, I can write lyrics to a song and then put it on an album, and they can't say anything back to me,
Yeah.
So I don't think I'd be involved in writing comments on the internet, but to take those negative emotions that I might feel on reading something and turning them into something constructive, that seems like a good way for an introvert like me to deal with the issue, whilst not making things worse on the internet, because I rarely see that happen in a comment section.
Oh, wow, yeah.
So, yeah.
Often kick yourself for going into you see some ridiculous headline, I'm going to click on the comments, and then you just spend the next 2 minutes wishing you didn't click on the comments.
Yeah.
Oh, my God.
And sometimes you feel like you got to detox from the internet for a while. But sometimes I also do feel like I see something that I really don't like the sound of, and I go, don't avoid it, Matt. Click it, find out what they're doing, find out what the problem is, find out what terrible thing this person has done, and, deal with the way that the world actually is rather than hiding from it. It's a bit of both. And as long as you're not doing it all the way one way and all the way the other, you won't either hide from it or get really depressed.
Yeah.
So
everything in moderation, right?
Yes, yeah. That's where that one came out of. Hopefully someone finds some inspiration in the way I've done things, either to not do them that way or to take something I've done and do it that way. But again, lyrics aren't important. Don't get confused about that.
Yeah.
They're just there to make the music better.
Yeah, I mean, the lyrics are always something that I'm interested in. I don't know if it's because I'm a vocalist, or maybe I was interested in lyrics way before I was a vocalist.
The more you look into how something is done and understand something, when you're, say, doing it for yourself or want to do it for yourself, you do gain a new appreciation for how others do it, and it suddenly becomes interesting to you. Like you guys put out a video or clip recently. Did you watch a lot more video clips in the run-up to sort of doing that, or?
Yeah.
And as I've been looking a little bit into audio production so that I can
Oh,
sort
yeah.
of do my demos a bit better or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
It's suddenly something I'm listening to differently on the records that I'm hearing, and
Oh, yeah.
and it's it's an interesting phenomenon, but
Mm.
I think it deepens the appreciation of it for the most part. But I guess there is something to be said about remaining a mystery.
Oh, yeah.
But for the most part, I think it's a positive thing to learn something,
Yep.
and then you have a better appreciation for the people who are experts, say, at that thing.
Oh, yeah. That's for sure. You find the more you learn about a certain thing, the more there is to learn about that thing.
Yeah.
And then there's a big, deep rabbit hole of
Yeah.
that thing.
Stephen Hawking, I think, was a proponent of this idea of the universal equation for a while, that maybe we would solve all of science, right? Okay, because
Just write it down.
yeah, we'd come up with the universal equation. But at some point, someone did some research, and their observation basically was the more we study stuff, the more complicated it becomes, and then we've got suddenly all this more stuff to study. And when we pick one of those things to study and study it, it becomes more complicated. So it seems
Yeah.
like every step that we get to better understanding the
Just keeps
universe,
branching off everywhere.
the harder and harder it becomes to actually understand it
Yep.
in the fullness of it.
Some people will be very disappointed if there is not an ultimate theory that can be formulated as a finite number of principles. I used to belong to that camp, but I have changed my mind. I'm now glad that our search for understanding will never come to an end, and that we will always have the challenge of new discovery. Stephen Hawking.
And to think that as we go forwards into the future, that things will just keep going that way, it makes the mind boggles about how humans are going to deal with understanding so much information. And, we often are quite frustrated with people that we meet that are ignorant of some certain thing or whatever. But the more we learn, it seems like the more that's going to be the norm, as it were, because how can one person absorb all this
All of that
disparate
stuff, yeah.
information? And then, well, what are we going to do? Specialize and have some people who are just total experts in one thing and have absolutely zero idea what's going on at the end of science?
Yeah, I mean, that's already...
To a degree.
Yeah.
But, and it's like a lot of people have a good degree of knowledge in a lot of things, but how far can it go? And it's, I don't know, too much to think about.
Sometimes you just got to go,
Gonna go listen to some metal. Just gonna forget about all of this stuff. Or gonna go write a song lyric with all my frustrations. Yeah, whatever tickles.
yeah.